Despite the quality of the Warlords of Draenor dungeons being absolutely fantastic, I think we've all noticed that you don't actually hop into them that much. Hell, in a recent developer Q&A, lead designer Ian Hazzikostas even said that Blizzard admit that they don't feel too relevant in the current endgame. He even asked for some ideas as to how the situation could be improved, so here is my shot at that. Overall, the goal is to rebalance the endgame to provide a more just gameplay-focused experience that importantly does not cannibalize content, which I think the current one does. If you look at the long list of gear sources that are available to characters who are eye level 630 or below, what you find is that the total number is extremely high, and it's at the point where normal and heroic dungeons may as well currently not exist, i.e. the content is completely cannibalized because, if you've got any sense, you'll get to 615 as soon as you can, you'll hop into the LFR, and the game will carry you up to a very high item level from there, completely missing the high quality dungeon content that's available. So there's the current problem, and my solutions to gear will slowly unravel as I move throughout this video. But first, let's talk about dungeon difficulty levels. Right now we have normal and heroic. As far as I'm concerned, the current level of heroic dungeons is doable by everybody, even if it does require someone to up their game and perhaps try a little bit harder. So let's scrap normal. Normal provides weak gear and no challenge. It's perfectly acceptable for a game to demand a little bit of skill. Just look at other top popular games, the most played games in the world, like League of Legends, Dota, maybe Call of Duty, Counter-Strike Go, etc, etc, etc. They're all okay with letting you fail and learn from it. Both in terms of gear and difficulty, I just think that, in balance, normal is irrelevant, not really of worth. So let's remove normal and scrap it entirely. Now of course if normal is removed, then we have to have a bit of a look at heroics. Now first of all, it doesn't make any sense having the only difficulty mode being heroic, so let's just rename the current day heroics to normals. These dungeons essentially fill the same position as they do today, though the item level requirement and gear rewards may have to be toned down just a little bit, in order to have a sort of smooth progression from when you ding to level 100. However, importantly, the difficulty tuning would remain the same. The fun of progression pretty much starts at current day heroic dungeons anyway, so I think this would just be cutting down on the fluff. Now that we've got the baseline dungeons covered, let's talk about what a heroic dungeon would be in this new system, and I think this is where stuff actually gets pretty cool. So currently in Warlords of Draenor, many players, including myself, think that actually mythic dungeons would be a great idea, and that's fine for the middle of an expansion, but if you think about it, they wouldn't be needed if the base dungeon difficulties made sense. I've already said in this video that the current day normals don't make sense, and I've already rebalanced them, so if we tweak heroics right, then mythic dungeons won't actually be needed at launch. By the way, if you're about to comment about how mythics are the same as challenge modes, then A, you're wrong, and B, I will cover that later on, in fact very soon. So my idea for the new heroic dungeon is quite different to the current one. It would offer gear slightly above looking for raid, and would be tuned to be about as hard as the non-pushover Cataclysm heroics. You might think it's odd, but all this would be doing is shifting the 645 item level that's offered by Garrison missions over to these dungeons. Currently, that potentially powerful gear is being thrown out for nothing. No gameplay, and importantly, no darn challenge at all. That is, frankly, a little bit absurd to me. This would be available on the Looking for Dungeon tool, however, it would importantly require a decently high item level in order to participate. This would be such that you'd almost need a full set of normal dungeon gear, along with some other pieces to get in. There would also be a gold proving ground requirement. I know that does sound pretty harsh, but this content's meant to be tricky, and you need to communicate that to players before they go in. Also, players would be able to enter these instances manually, in a group, at any item level, meaning that if you're in a guild or you're in an organized pug, you can avail of this content whenever you please. The restrictions are only there to manage the experience of the Looking for Dungeon tool. Already, this is very much unlike challenge modes, but other differences include, say, that this content does not scale with your power, which gives you a sense of power progression as you move throughout them. And also, instead of having the randomized single bit of gear per day that challenge modes currently offer, this would be giving you access to a fully itemized and thought out loot table for every single dungeon, which I think would be a lot better. So essentially, to summarize these last two changes, just so it's clear, we're removing the current day normal dungeons. We are then rebadging the current day heroic dungeons as normal dungeons, in order to facilitate people moving from just freshly dinging max level into the dungeon gameplay. The item level requirement and reward will be tuned down a little bit, but importantly, the difficulty will remain consistent with what it currently is. After that, we are changing up what the idea of a heroic dungeon is, such that a heroic dungeon is challenging and it gives good gear. However, it's right up there with, say, those harder Cataclysm heroics, though in order to protect people from LFD related problems, we are going to be putting in a gold proving ground requirement. Now, the LFR does also apply to this. It would still offer gear that's slightly better than my newly rebalanced normal dungeons. That's the same, essentially, as how it is currently done in the game, so no big difference there. However, the big difference is that the gear that is in between this looking for raid and normal modes would come from the newly thought out heroic dungeons. So essentially you would have normal dungeons, then LFR, then heroic dungeons, then normal raids. Really, I think this system would help to combat the feeling of content drought that's currently going on. With the dungeon system, Blizzard has created some excellent content, but they balance their loot system and difficulty levels in such a way that that excellent content is basically irrelevant. In the context of endgame progression, content that is irrelevant may as well not exist for the vast majority, and I think that's a big problem that contributes to the current, lack of happiness that some people are experiencing. Of course, yeah, nice transmogs and mounts are still a thing that I think could be thrown into dungeons now and then. And that essentially is it for the whole system. Overall, I think this would just create a PvE gear progression system that is more sustainable and that's actually based off real gameplay, rather than just handouts from the LFR and the Garrison follower table. I think it really is unfortunate that you get such good gear from that follower table without actually earning it on your character. And while I can understand that that High Maul and Blackrock gear is only one bit every 2 weeks, the 645 random gear is really quite consistent. It's given out all the time, and I think that is too much. So that's pretty much it for the video and the new system. Of course, there are probably kinks that need to be ironed out, but for now, that's the basic idea. If you've got any thoughts of your own, then leave them down in the comments. Thank you very much for watching the video, and I'll see you next time.